What's up, everybody? Happy Black History Month. Yes, that seems to be under attack. A lot of people don't want to teach it, they don't want to celebrate it, they don't want to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. Hey, for those of you around this Jacksonville area, we are going to have the Martin Luther King parade. I believe it's February 17th. I need to check my calendars. It was postponed, so they rescheduled it. So February 17th, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. If I'm wrong, let people know that we are still going to do the Martin Luther King's parade. So this Black History Month, I was planning on going live. I did a live show with a living legend, Lawrence Walden. I'm gonna get with him again to do another show with him. The show about the Black history, American history that he lived. Oh man, it was a great show this past Tuesday. Him letting us know all the shows. I know I can't remember everything. He was in Air Force. He taught school. Well, actually taught in college. He was on several shows in Hollywood with a lot of well-renowned movie stars and actors and musicians. And he's a musician, so he's played a lot of sets with a lot of famous people. So that he's one of these very interesting men, very interesting people. So what we're gonna do tonight, I just wanted. I like playing trivia, but I didn't tell anybody about the live. So if people do join in, I can play trivia later on. But what I'm gonna do now is we're just gonna learn some history together. I got a couple of videos I want to play, so we just play this one. There might be some things that you already know, some things that you might have forgotten about. Just speaking about Black history, I don't like calling us Black history. I like to say we are Americans of African descent. I think makes more sense to me. When you say Black or Black American, you are trying to distinguish and trying to separate different people in a particular country, our country. So I would like us to be unified instead of continuing to separate. I don't even like that Black and the Black race and white race was invented just for here in America. Before that, there was no such thing. So yeah, that's a whole nother 2-hour discussion, just even talking about the word being called Black and all the things that come along with it. The privileges or non-privilege that you get just by being called Black, or when you fill out an application, you have to check that box that says Black or African descent or something like that. It's putting you in a box. You are presumed certain things, and certain privileges are not provided to you because of just that one block of the color of your skin. Okay, well, anyway, I'm gonna get into it. Let me hit the share screen. And like I said, somebody want to join in the conversation. You got some history to teach, history that you live. Are you Black history? Do you just report Black history? Do you study Black history? Or are you one that's making Black history? You can join on in with the conversation. I'm just gonna let it flow. So here, I'm gonna play this video here. Let's see, share the screen, share that screen, add the audio, and here we go. I got it, and I'm going to hit play.
To celebrate Black History Month or Negro History Week, which was introduced by historian Carter G. Woodson, you will find out 10 Black history facts that are least known in today's video. So sit back, relax, hold tight, and something unique is coming your way.
I see you asked Mr. Baker for joining me in.
Before there was Rosa Parks, there was Claudette Colvin. Most people, including you, think of Rosa Parks as the first person to refuse to give up their seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Well, several women came before Rosa Parks, one of whom was Claudette Colvin. It was March 2nd, 1955, when the 15-year-old schoolgirl refused to move to the back of the bus. This incident happened 9 months before Rosa Parks' stand that launched the Montgomery bus boycott. Claudette had been studying Black leaders like Harriet Tubman in her segregated school. Those conversations had led to a discussion around the current-day Jim Crow laws they were all experiencing. When the bus driver ordered Claudette to get up, she refused. Claudette said it felt like Sojourner Truth was on one side pushing me down, and Harriet Tubman was on the other side of me pushing me down. I couldn't get up. Claudette Colvin's stand didn't stop there. She had the will to do something for her people, which got her arrested and thrown in jail. She was one of 4 women who challenged the segregation law in court. If Broder vs. Gale became the court case that successfully overturned the bus segregation laws in both Montgomery and the state of Alabama, why has Claudette's story been largely forgotten? At the time, the NAACP and other Black organizations thought Rosa Parks made a better icon for the movement than a teenager. As an adult with the right looks, Rosa Parks was also the NAACP secretary and was both well-known and respected. People would associate her with the middle class, which would also attract support for the cause. But the struggle to end segregation was often fought by young people, more than half of which were women. The courage of Claudette Colvin has become just another story. To pay tribute to a 15-year-old girl's bravery, you can read Claudette Colvin's book, Twice Towards Justice. Martin Luther King Jr. improvised the most iconic part of his I Have a Dream speech. It's normal to improvise speeches on stage, but I Have a Dream sounds impossible, but it's true. On Wednesday, August the 28th, 1963, 250,000 Americans united at the Lincoln Memorial for the March's final speech on Washington. As Martin Luther King Jr. stood at the podium, he eventually pushed his notes aside. The night before the march, Dr. King began working on his speech with a small group of advisors in the Willard Hotel lobby. The original speech was more political and less historic, according to Clarence B. Jones, and it didn't include any references to dreams. After delivering the now famous line,
"No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream,"
Dr. King transformed his speech into a sermon. On stage during Dr. King, singer Mahalia Jackson reportedly kept saying, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And while no one would know if he heard her, it could have likely been the inspiration he needed. Dr. King then continued.
"So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream."
And then the famous Baptist preacher preached on, adding repetition and outlining the specifics of his dream. No one from the authorities was ready for this impromptu speech, but somewhere deep down, they knew something like this could happen. But even earlier, they discussed delivering a speech in the form of a sermon, but nothing was fixed. That day, honesty and emotions ruled the stage and traveled through the crowd. While this spontaneous speech given on a hot August day in 1963 was not considered a universal success immediately, it is now recognized as one of American history's greatest speeches. Inoculation was introduced to America by an enslaved African. Few details are known about the
I want to pause a minute. Something in the first part of the video, they mentioned something about the Jim Crow laws, and I believe a lot of people don't. They're not taught about the Jim Crow laws. A lot of people forgot about the Jim Crow laws. I want to let me see if I could bring a video up real quick about the Jim Crow laws, about how the situation was back in the day. Let me see. Just 1 second. I didn't plan on bringing this up. Yes. Enter. Real quick. Somebody should have a nice, good video about it. Here's a cartoon. So let's watch the cartoon together. Just a second. Let me see if I can slide this over. I'm gonna slide this over here. Just a second, guys. Just a second. Okay, let's see what they're talking about. Just want to see if we can explain what the Jim Crow laws were.
Imagine what it was like to be a Southern slave living during the Civil War era. Your hopes were aroused with Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. Even so, because you lived in the Confederate States of America, your master could care less about Lincoln's executive order. But at last, after 2 more long years, you experienced elation as the South surrendered to Union forces. At long last, you were free. Yet, as you made your way in this strange new world, everywhere you encountered local laws intended to prevent you from succeeding in life. These laws restricted the freedom you thought you had attained. True, you were no longer a slave, but under some of these laws, you weren't free either. These laws were called Jim Crow laws. Okay, but who was Jim Crow? Even before the Civil War took place, the term Jim Crow was derogatory slang for Negro. It is believed that the origin of the term dates back to the 1820s or so, when a white comedian wrote a song and dance called Jump Jim Crow about a disabled slave. Soon the term caught on, and by the outbreak of the Civil War was a common nickname for black slaves and free African Americans. Jim Crow laws existed primarily between the end of the Civil War to the mid-1960s. They took many forms and varied considerably by locale, but segregation and discrimination were common themes. Let's learn more about Jim Crow laws. The immediate aftermath of the Civil War is called Reconstruction, or the Reconstruction era, which took place between 1865 to 1877. Southern Democrats were particularly active in passing Jim Crow laws in the aftermath of the Civil War. There was widespread resentment because the North had won the war and slaves were now free. To maintain white dominance and keep free blacks from gaining affluence,
Man, you can't even play videos nowadays. Oh man, can we? Oh, let's see. Well, study.com won't let us finish that video. But I guess we did learn a lot in that little bit about the like I said, the laws. So the slaves were freed, but they want them to have
To celebrate Black History Month or Negro History Week, which was introduced as Martin Luther King Jr. stood at the podium, he eventually pushed his notes aside.
Sorry. Technical issues. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So even though the slaves were freed, they didn't have rights. Again, didn't have rights to work, didn't have the rights as the quote unquote whites. So they came up with the Jim Crow law. So Jim Crow was a derogatory name for people of color or African descent. So they made these laws, and we saw a lot of the Democratic Party helped make a lot of these laws, and it was basically segregation laws. I know some of y'all have seen those pictures of water fountains, whites only, blacks only, or blacks could only go to the back of restaurants. They couldn't come to the front. We just heard, Rosa Parks and the story about there was like anybody been a line or imaginary line on buses where the black people had to sit in the back of the bus and the whites could sit up front. And then if the bus got filled up, the blacks would have to stand up or get off and give the seats up to the white people. So that was the law. That was the law of the land. You get thrown in jail for not a person of color not giving up the seat for a white person. So that's the whole, the gist of Rosa Parks and the different women who decided to not give up their seats, or even the Woolworths, the different sit-ins, to where they, the restaurant said they wasn't going to serve people of color because of Jim Crow laws, and they just especially it was a lot of college students that would sit in, were blacks and whites, that would sit in, and then it was get beat up for just sitting at the counter. I know I learned a little bit about it. The what happened here in Jacksonville. Now I forgot. I'm not from Jacksonville, so I kind of what was it called? Axe Handle Sunday. Yeah, Axe Handle Sunday, where I think we need to bring it up and watch it together. But the gist of it is people of color decided to do a sit-in, but the white people decided they wasn't going to put up with no sit-in, so they got axe handles one Sunday and came and just beat this living daylights out of the people of color. That was, like I said, right here in Jacksonville. There's a lot of stuff that's trying to be kept quiet and kept hidden, so I guess they don't want their children to find out what their granddad, grandma, great-granddad, great-grandma, they don't want their children to know that's what they did. So they try to take it out of history books to try to keep people from learning about it. But history is history. So I don't think should be held back. If we don't teach the past, it's going to be repeated. And a lot of stuff from the past is being repeated. A lot of rights are being slowly and systematically taken away. Okay, since that video didn't continue to play, let's go back to the original video. All right. I don't know. If someone said I was echoing, I just hit mute on my phone. So I hit mute on my computer if it's echoing. All right, I'm gonna hit play again.
Could have likely been the inspiration he needed. Dr. King didn't continue.
So even though we face the difficulties,
That was further along than this. Let me jump ahead a little bit.
Like this could happen. But even earlier, they discussed delivering the speeches. Inoculation was introduced to America by an enslaved African. Few details are known about the birth of Onesimus, but it's assumed he was born in Africa in the late 17th century before eventually landing in Boston. One of the 1,000 African descendants living in the Massachusetts colony, Onesimus was a gift to the Puritan church minister Cotton Mather's from his congregation in 1706. Onesimus told Mather's about the century-old tradition of inoculation practiced in Africa. By extracting the material from an infected person and scratching it into the skin of an uninfected person, you could deliberately introduce smallpox to the healthy individual, making them immune. He described to Mather's the process of inoculation that had been performed on him and others in his society in Africa, saying people take a juice of smallpox and cut the skin and put in a drop. Considered extremely dangerous at the time, Cotton Mather's convinced Dr. Zabdiel Boyston to experiment with the procedure when a smallpox epidemic hit Boston in 1721, and over 240 people were inoculated. Opposed politically, religiously, and medically in the United States and abroad, public reaction to the experiment put Mather's and Boylston's lives in danger, despite records indicating that only 2% of the patients requesting inoculation died compared to 15% of the people not inoculated who contracted smallpox. Onesimus' traditional African practice was used to inoculate American soldiers during the Revolutionary War and introduced the concept of inoculation to the United States. However, an inscription on Boylston's tomb incorrectly identified him as the first one to have introduced the practice of inoculation into America. In 2016, medical science came to know about Onesimus' contribution, following which he was placed among the 100 best Bostons of all time by Boston Magazine. And when historian Ted Widmer of Markley Honors College at City University, New York, noted that Onesimus reversed many of the colonists' traditional racial assumptions. He had a lot more knowledge medically than most of the Europeans in Boston at the time. The earliest recorded protest against slavery was by the Quakers in 1688. Quakers, also known as the Society of Friends, have a long history of abolitionism. The initial protest in the 17th century, drafted by Francis Daniel Pastoris, a young German attorney, and 3 other Quakers living in Germantown, Pennsylvania, on behalf of the Germantown meeting of the Religious Society of Friends to raise the issue of slavery with the Quakers meeting which they attended. They saw the slave trade as a grave injustice against their fellow man and used the golden rule to argue against such inhumane treatment. Regardless of skin color, we should do unto others as we would have done unto ourselves. In their protest, they stated, "Pray what things in the world can be done worse towards us, than if men shall rob or steal us away and sell us for slaves to strange countries, separating husband from their wife and children." Their protest against slavery and human trafficking was presented at a monthly meeting at Dublin and Philadelphia. The Dublin monthly meeting reviewed the protest and sent it to the quarterly meeting, feeling it was too serious of an issue for their own meeting to decide. The 4 friends continued their efforts and presented it at the Philadelphia yearly meeting, but it wasn't until 88 years later that the Society of Friends officially denounced slavery. Over the centuries, this rare document has been considered lost twice. Most recently, it was rediscovered in 2005 and is now at Hartford College Special Collections. Of the 12.5 million Africans shipped to the New World during the transatlantic slave trade, fewer than 388,000 arrived in the United States. In the late 15th century, seafaring technologies advancements created a new Atlantic that would change the world forever. As ships began connecting West Africa with Europe and the Americas, new fortunes were sought and native populations were decimated. With the native labor force dwindling and demand for plantation and mining labor growing, the transatlantic slave trade began. Sea Route gave the green light to the transatlantic slave trade that was underway from 1500 to 1866, shipping more than 12 million enslaved Africans across the world. Of those Africans, only 10.7 million survived the dreaded Middle Passage. Over 400 years, most enslaved Africans, 4.9 million of them, found their way to Brazil, where they suffered incredibly high mortality rates due to terrible working conditions. You will be amazed to know that Brazil was the last country to ban slavery in 1888. By the time the United States became involved in the slave trade, it had been underway for 200 years. The majority, but not all, of its 388 enslaved Africans arrived between 1700 and 1866, representing a much smaller percentage than most Americans realize. The diverse history of historically Black colleges and universities. When it comes to the pursuit of civil rights, Jewish and African American communities have a tumultuous shared history. There is a chapter in this shared history that is often overlooked. In the 1930s, when Jewish academics from Germany and Austria were dismissed from their teaching positions, many came to the United States looking for jobs. Due to the Depression, the xenophobia, and the rising anti-Semitism, many found it challenging to find work. But more than 50 found positions at HBCUs in the segregated South. Originally established to educate freed enslaved Africans to read and write, the first of the HBCUs was Cheyney University in Pennsylvania, established in 1837. By the time the Jewish professors arrived, the number of HBCUs had grown to 78. Because both Jews and African Americans were persecuted, Jewish professors in the Black colleges found the environment comfortable and accepting, often creating special programs to provide opportunities to engage Blacks and whites in meaningful conversation, often for the first time. In the years that followed, the interests of Jewish and African American communities increasingly diverged, but this once shared experience of discrimination and interracial cooperation remains a vital part of the civil rights movement. 1 in 4 cowboys was Black.
Wow, that's something I didn't know about the HBCU. I don't know if you missed it. He was saying that there was a lot of Jewish or Jews professors that were persecuted back in their home. Well, we know about the Holocaust and all that craziness that went on. So then they came to America and they were still persecuted here and they couldn't get a job. And then here's the HBCUs. Historically Black universities. Why were they started? So it's so many. I don't know if you notice a lot of, like in the news and different people, they are upset about the HBCUs. Why are we funding the HBCUs? We need to defund the Black universities. It shouldn't be a Black university. That's from people who don't know their history. Why is it? Why are there HBCUs? Why are they needed? Where there was a time where there was plenty of universities that refused to allow people of color to be taught. It was against the law in some places to teach people of color how to read and write. Most definitely, becoming a student. Who was that person? I can see that in my mind. I think Carver, George Washington Carver. I think he had to study. At first, he was. Please, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I'm fine. I'm open to be corrected when I'm wrong. I believe I forgot what university he was studying at, but he had to sit on the outside of the building and try to learn from out the window. And then eventually they let him in the classroom, but he had to sit, way in the back, away from the white students, because they wanted to keep it separate. They didn't want him to be a part of the education system. But yes, that's the reasoning for HBCUs is because our country, the great old United States of America, did not want people of color learning. Well, then we had the different schools. They wanted separate. They called it separate but equal school systems, but it was separate but not equal. And believe it or not, I believe the very first person of color to go and help, quote unquote, integrated school, meaning, they started mixing, they started allowing people of color to go to the white school. That was in the 50s. That's not that. People are still alive. Let's put it that way. People are still alive who can tell stories about their integration. I know my dad, stepdad, they both could tell me of how they was part of integrating the schools. We've seen a story where is it Ruby Lee? See, I'm bad with names. You see it in pictures, a little black girl integrating the school. I think that was is either Alabama or Mississippi. Even the mayor, the governor, saying it's not going to happen. So they had to send the government, the president had to send in the National Guard to protect her as she went to school. And a lot of, person of color, little boys and little girls had to be protected by the military because the white people, the way to say it, did not want their children they didn't want the people of color to come to their school. They wanted everything segregated. The racism was so strong and high, which is still here, prevalent today. And still here today. It's not as bad, but it's still here. They have different ways of hiding it and showing it. But anyway, so the government had to step in and force. But it was a law. It was a law of the land to keep it separate. They called it separate but equal, but it wasn't equal. A lot of the schools with the children of color, they got the last, they got the worst, they got the raggedy books, if they did get books. The teachers wasn't paid right, or they got the leftovers, they got the trash. So the society, our country, and some of the states did not want people of color to be educated. They didn't want them to learn. They didn't want them to be on the same footing to be able to get educated and be competing with them to get jobs. So they went out of their ways to make sure that people of color stayed behind, or they had certain jobs that people of color, and a lot of times women also, that they couldn't get certain jobs. So they had to make laws to force them. And that's where affirmative action comes from, when you had to pretty much twist people's arms to make them let people come into the schools, let people get particular jobs, let people get particular training. And here today, the same people who didn't want the people of color in those positions back then. They still don't want the people of color in those positions now. But just recently, any kind of affirmative action was outlawed. And then we know this other situation, DEI, is another form of trying to make it equal and let everybody have the same opportunity. So now everybody had the same opportunity. We want to make sure that everybody don't have the same opportunity. So let's get rid of anything that cause an even playing field. So now is, no affirmative action. And then I think about affirmative action, the people of color fought. They was the ones. Let me just go here real quick. After slavery, we're doing slavery. Well, let's go back to the Native Americans. When the Europeans came over and they wanted free labor. I'm gonna take this off the screen for a minute, and then I'm gonna get back to the video. When the Europeans needed some labor, they tried to get the natives under control and let them be the workers. That didn't work. They didn't go for it. So they had problems with that. So they did their best to kill most of the natives off, gave them smallpox, or just it's undescribable how cruel they was treated and killed, even by the government and the military. And then so a lot of land was given to the European. Okay, come to America, we'll give you free land, and that's how you build wealth off the land that you got. So that's what a lot of these families they've gotten wealth from generation after generation. They pass it down along, from generation to generation, because a lot of it was just given to them. They just show up, the land is yours. So now they needed somebody to work the land. They wanted to, in the South, tobacco and cotton and different plantations to work. They needed some workers. So I'm just generalizing. So they needed workers. So that's where the slave trade came in. But a majority of the Africans that was taken was going down to South America, Brazil, different places. So America caught on a little bit later. So then they started bringing in Africans, making them slaves, and became super rich. They built the country off the back of the free labor. And there was a law. There was a law of the land to have slaves. It was, so a lot of people talk about you need to obey the law. There are some laws that needs to be changed. So yeah, it was a law. It was legal to have slaves and treat them any kind of way you wanted to. But you saw the Quakers were the first ones. Those were Europeans. They were the first ones to protest against the slavery, and not talking about the slaves themselves. But even before slavery, people of color was living in this country. It was prosperous. They had one was like the ones that like the presidents before. I know, got to dig into it a little bit. It was like three people for that were the president before George Washington, and one of them was a person of color, and there was another person of color that was nominated to be the vice president way back in the 1700s. People of color, like I said, there was some royalty. There was a lot of people of color royalty from Europe. So, like I said, the way it started being treated later, it wasn't that way. If you was a person of color and you had money, you had means, you can. So much stuff is hidden. I just like if you could just look up people of color on coins, or people of color royalty, people of color kings and queens back in Europe. It's gonna just blow your mind of what's been hidden or just been covered up. But so anyway, when it came to America, they still had their power, they still had their authority until the time of Beacon's Rebellion. And just real quick history of the Beacon Rebellion. before the big rebellion, it was basically poor against rich. So the rich folks had it made, and they even white folks were kind of slaves too. Yeah, they were slaves too, but it was some they call them indentured servants. That meant a lot of Europe was sending some of the people that they really didn't care to keep. They were struggling and trying to make it over there in England and Europe and different places. So they were struggling. So, okay, we'll send you to America. You can go get a job over there. And they get to America, didn't have no money. So they had to become indigent servants to pay off their trip, to pay different things off. So the poor white people were treated bad. The natives were treated bad. Then some of the poor people of color were treated bad. And like I said, I'm just jumping all over this part, but the poor people joined together to go against the rich folks. Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion was squashed. So that didn't work out. So the whites like, okay, we got to figure out a way to make sure that don't happen again. We can't have these natives and black folks and white. Well, it wasn't even because that. But anyway, we can't have them joining forces like this. They're gonna take over and change everything that we got set up here. So how do we keep set up a separation? So that's when the white race and black race was invented. So the rich white folks decided, okay, so we need to make sure that those poor white people don't join forces with the black people again. So let's start this race called white race. And the white race is going to get some special privileges, whether you're rich or poor. As a white man, basically, like you read the Constitution, it was talking about a white man. We're getting certain rights and privileges. Not only was a white man, you had to own land. So a lot of times, I guess those things back in the day, you need to read every line, read the fine print. There's a lot of fine print. A lot of it saying, white man that own land, we're giving you this power and authority. It wasn't everybody in America, but I digress. So we'll go back talking about the rich white people, poor white people. One thing that you can have a gun to protect your family. We talking about some gun rights and all this kind of stuff now. The black man, he couldn't have a gun. He couldn't protect his family. He can just get attacked and treated any kind of way that they wanted to, because they took his right to bear arms. They took his gun away. So you hear people today talking about taking guns away. Yeah, it happened before, but it was over a racial thing. I still think it's even now. I believe I'm not going down that road, but yeah, it's I don't. Well, anyway, we have a right to bear arms now, and I believe everybody should take advantage of that right. But that was one thing that they took away when the man. That's one thing. A man, especially a husband and a father, it's his duty for him to decide to marry a woman and to have children with the woman, and it's his duty. He gave up his life to protect his wife and his children, and his grandmama, granddaddy, whoever, protect his family. But to the right to have a gun was taken away. So that's one thing that was taken away. So he wasn't able to protect his family like he should have. But anyway, so that was anyway the invention of the black and white. And then after that, that's when slavery kicked in. And so most of the people of color became slaves, especially in the South. Up north, there was still some free people of color, but they still didn't have it easy. It was still rough. A lot of things that they owned and everything was taken away. But there were people of color that had slaves. Yes, not only was white people had slaves, people of color had slaves. So I have no like some people, they go, oh yeah, ancestors had slaves. I'm like, so what? It was a law of the land. It was, you didn't have to have them, but it was still the law of the land. I don't think I would have had them, but if the only way you can compete with other people and other farmers is to have slaves. So I think it was some people that had slaves, and they treated their they treated their slaves better than others. So I'm not saying that I agree with it, but it was a law of the land, so it was legal. But just because stuff is the law of the land doesn't mean that you have to partake in it. Okay, so now that the slavery, so now after, I had to get back to the video. After the protest and Civil War over, the Civil War was more than just slavery. But imagine the South got thousands and upon thousands of slaves, free labor. And up north, they didn't have that much free labor. So it was a lot of battle between states with money and states without money. And that's even, I believe, what happened with North Carolina and South Carolina. Well, they was really the Carolinas. And Tennessee, all that was one real big state. But one part had slaves that made money because of the slaves, and another part didn't have that much money because they didn't have that slave labor. So a lot of that had to do with the Civil War. The South wanted to keep the slaves. The North wanted to free the slaves. Well, free, that's still kind of touchy too, because when the slaves were free, the slaves were only freed in the South. The slave that was up north wasn't free. Something else to dig into. You think about the Electoral College. The Electoral College was for, it was based off slaves. And a lot of people will say that the government considered people of color 1/3 man, something like that. It wasn't. They was calling them 1/3 man or half man, quarter man. That's not what they were saying. What they were saying was they had 1/3 representation for the country. So if you were up north and you had 5 people on your property, you had 5 people representation. So in the South, if there's 5 white people, you got 5 white people representation. But if you had 50 slaves, they were not going to give you representation of 50 slaves. Even though they couldn't vote, but you couldn't get representation of 50 people. They only gave you 1/3 per slave. That's where that comes from. A fraction of a slave give you representation. That's what all based it around the Electoral College. Electoral College should be done away with. So now what they're doing with the Electoral College, we don't have slaves, but guess what? Where is a large population of people who cannot vote? And that just reminded me of this too. So if you read where the slaves were freed in America, but slavery is still legal in America. I'm going to say it again. Slaves were freed in America, but slavery is still legal in America. So the fine print, well, a lot of times we don't get taught this, is that, and again, I don't have it in front of me. I didn't brush up on them before I started talking. But basically what it says is, we're freeing the African descent, we're freeing them, so it's no more slavery. But if the person is charged of a crime, they're considered as pretty much still a slave, or becomes a slave again. So that's why pretty much the people in prison are slaves. When the Civil War was over, the people of color were freed, and some of them got kicked off the land and didn't have nowhere to go. So now they're standing around trying to figure out what to do. So let's pass a law called lottery. Lottery, just standing around, hanging around. You can't just stand around. So it's a law. So now they show the sheriff roll up on you. Hey, you just standing around. We'll have nowhere to go. Okay, you're arrested, get locked up. You go to court. Yep. Your crime was standing outside the building. The punishment, 5 years of prison. So now you get thrown in jail, in prison, chain gang, and now you get to go right back to the plantation that you were just freed from. Now you're a prisoner working at the same place, getting treated just as bad or even worse than you did when you was a slave. So they had these jaywalking. You cross the street. Oh, you just broke the law. Locking you up. We got to give you 20 years for jaywalking. They got your back. And so I done got myself confused on where I was going with the story. Now imagine, I remember back the train. So after around the time of freeing the slaves and everything, the railroad was kicking off. The railroad was building and running railroads across the country. They needed some labor. So what they did was they brought a bunch of Asians or Chinese to work the railroad. So that's when they opened it up. Come on to America. Come and work. We need some workers. So they opened up the doors and let the Asians come in, and they treated them bad. Okay, they didn't treat them right. Didn't work out. See, that plan didn't work out too well. They abused the Asians, did them bad, beat them up. If you watch some of these westerns, you can see a lot of stuff that was going on during that time in a lot of these westerns. There's one this movie called Kung Fu. I think he was like one of them. I've seen, what is it, Bonanza? Bonanza touch on a little bit. But anyway, that's where they brought a lot of the Chinese over. And I don't think they allowed their family. I didn't study it before this, so I don't think they let their family, but they brought them in to get work done. Didn't work out. They ended up sending them back. But you got these free labor. So a lot of states, when the state will arrest all these people of color. So now the farmer could pay the state to have the slaves to come back and work for free, or the railroads paid the state to allow the people who they locked up, chain gang, they pay them to let them come back. Let me jump on this. Lord, I didn't mean to talk about all these different things, but let's talk about reparations. Reparations, real quick. You know, a lot of people, I know you're hearing that word reparations coming across people. Hey, we need reparation. Like, no, it's no such thing, or you don't deserve it and you shouldn't get it. People of color don't deserve no reparations, and nobody got reparations. Yes, it did. When the slaves were freed, I know a lot of y'all know what's his name? What's his name that makes the movies? No, that's bad. But anyway, the people of color were promised 40 acres and a mule. 40 acres and a mule. That's what Lincoln and his government promised the slaves. They can get 40 acres and a mule. You know that would be life changing. And that's all you need. You're not going to get no house, not going to get no welfare, you're not going to get no food. All you're going to get, you can get 40 acres and a mule. And that was enough to get, I don't know how many slaves it was at the time, but imagine millions of now African Americans could have started a better life for themselves, and they would have generational wealth by this point. But it was Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and the new president determined, like, no, we're not going to give them 40 acres and a mule, but we are going to give we're going to get reparations to the slave owners that lost the slaves. So we had this war, and we freed the slaves from spending hundreds of years working for free, and you get nothing for doing all that work. But the slave owners got reparations from the country for losing their slaves. So now people saying, should people of color get some you know what I'm trying to say? And people all up in arms like, no, that can't happen, that can't happen, that can't happen. But the slave owners, the slave masters got it. And workers, they never got their 40 acres and a mule. And it's other people. I can't go deep into it, but a lot of Native Americans, they got reparations. When the Japanese were treated terribly during the World War, they got reparations. Everybody got reparations except for the people of color, the slaves. Ain't that something? But anyway, I talked about so many different things. I'm lost. So let me go back to the video. Hit me up with some questions if I didn't confuse you, because I don't confuse myself. I forgot where I was going. All right, here we go. We're going to be talking about the Black Rodeo. Before we talk about Black Rodeo, let me say this. When they talk about hockey, I don't know if they got this in the video. Did y'all know people of color, the ones invented hockey? You might not see a lot of representation playing hockey, but people of color are the ones that invented hockey. All right, okay, there we go. Go back to the video. What? Okay. Go over here.
To read and write. The first of the HBCUs was Chain University in Pennsylvania, established in 1837. By the time the Jewish professors arrived, the number of HBCUs had grown to 78. Because both Jews and African Americans were persecuted, Jewish professors in the Black colleges found the environment comfortable and accepting, often creating special programs to provide opportunities to engage Blacks and whites in meaningful conversation, often for the first time. In the years that followed, the interests of Jewish and African American communities increasingly diverged, but this once shared experience of discrimination and interracial cooperation remains a vital part of the civil rights movement. 1 in 4 cowboys was Black, despite the stories told in popular books and movies. Are you surprised? The biggest shock for you is it is believed that the real Lone Ranger was inspired by the African American man named Bass Reeves. Reeves had been born into slavery, but escaped west during the Civil War, where he lived in what was known as Indian Territory. He eventually became a deputy U.S. Marshal, was a master of disguise, an expert marksman, had a Native American companion, and rode a silver horse. Sounds similar to a Tarantino movie? No. If you think he had a unique fate, I'm afraid you're wrong. In the 19th century, the Wild Wild West drew enslaved Africans with the hope of freedom and wages. When the Civil War ended, freedmen came west, hoping for a better life where the demand for skilled labor was high. These African Americans made up at least a quarter of the legendary cowboys. They lived dangerous lives facing weather, rattlesnakes, and outlaws while they slept under the stars driving cattle herds to market. While there was little formal segregation in the frontier towns and a great deal of personal freedom, Black cowboys were often expected to do more of the work in the roughest jobs than their white counterparts. Loyalty did develop between the cowboys on the drive, but the Black cowboys were typically responsible for breaking the horse and being the first ones to cross flooded streams during cattle drives. In fact, it is believed that the term cowboy originated as a derogatory term used to describe Black cowhands. Esther Jones was the real Betty Boop. Most of you might be thinking,
I want to pause there a minute. The very last bit where he said about the cowboys. Back over here. Okay, he said that the term cowboys. Okay, if you watch westerns, my mom used to love westerns. I watched westerns a lot, but white people They were called cow hands. Cow hands. And they tried to, not try to, a derogatory way. You had people of color, men, particular, they were not treated as men, talked as men. They called them boy. I don't know, y'all know that. A white man, even no matter how old he was, like a little teenager boy, could call his senior, an older black man, could call him boy. So it was a way for them to try to say that they are superior or call them a boy. So the white people were called cow hands. And to put down the people of color, they called them cowboys. But the cowboys did such a great job of what they did. Like you just heard, they had the hard jobs. They did the hard work. A lot of the movies, especially like a lot of those westerns that I used to watch, the western my mom used to see, you don't see no black folks. You thought there weren't no black folks out there. But they was called cowboys and Indians. It was so the black people were the ones that was called cowboys, but they did such a great job that their work was renowned. So the work was so great that the white folks didn't mind to start being called cowboys. So that's so funny or ironic to me for what they call the America's team. The Dallas Cowboys is really a derogatory basis in the Dallas Negro cow people. But yeah, that's one thing of pride where you do such a great job to where your enemy wants to be called you. That's even the way it used to be the what you call it, they want to change the name back. The Washington Redskins. There again, Redskins was something derogatory for the natives, but they had such a reputation that the people decided they wanted to call their whole NFL team Redskins. So they done protest and changed it to the Washington Commanders, but actual Native Americans want them to change the name back. So it said it didn't offend them. They was proud of being to have a NFL team named after them. I guess the political correct people, the ones said, no, you can hurt these people's feelings. If you change it, you need to change the name because you're hurting their feelings. And the way I look at it, if you got a team called the what is it? What National Negroes or the Fighting Black Boys or something like that, and you got white guys calling themselves that. You got white people with flags and T-shirts and bumper stickers and stuff saying, the National Black Boys or something. I wouldn't get upset with it because you call yourself that. Anyway, I know I think about stuff differently. Okay, all right, going back to the video. Back to the video. How do I get back to the video?
Were typically responsible for breaking the horse and being the first ones to cross flooded streams during cattle drives. In fact, it is believed that the term cowboy originated as a derogatory term used to describe black cowhands. Esther Jones was the real Betty Boop. Most of you might be thinking, who's Betty Boop? Why Esther Jones? Let me tell you, these baby characters were similar. The difference was Betty Boop was a cartoon character, thought to be inspired by someone else. Sometimes later, people came to know about Esther Jones and realized she strengthened the roots. The iconic cartoon character Betty Boop was inspired by a black jazz singer in Harlem. Introduced by cartoonist Matt Fleischer in 1930, the jazz-age Flappers character was the first and most famous sex symbol in animation. Betty Boop is known for her revealing dress, curvy figure, and signature vocals, doo-wop-doo. While there has been controversy over the years, the inspiration has been traced back to Esther Jones, known as Baby Esther, and performed regularly in a cotton club during the 1920s. Baby Esther's trademark vocal style of using bops and other childlike sounds attracted her attention to Helen Kane during the performance in the late 1920s. After seeing Baby Esther, Helen Kane adopted her style and began using bops in her songs as well. Finding fame early on, Helen Kane often included this baby style into her music. When Betty Boop was introduced, Kane promptly sued Fleischer and Paramount Public Corporation, stating that they were using her image and style. However, video evidence came to light of Baby Esther performing in a nightclub, and the courts ruled against Helen Kane, stating that she didn't have exclusive rights to the bopping style or image, and that style, in fact, predated her. Baby Esther's baby style did little to bring her mainstream fame, as she died in relatively obscurity, but a piece of her lives on in an iconic character, Betty Boop.
What was that? I don't know.
The first light.
I play Betty Boop on the TV channel, and what I've noticed, so that kind of explained to me why, if you what I've noticed, some of the first Betty Boops, you can tell the person is a person of color. The Betty Boop is a person of color. Even the cartoon got a little tint on it. If you go to later years, the skin kind of got whiter and whiter and whiter, and even the music changed. Some of the original ones, Cap Calloway, he performed the band. They actually showed the band playing before the cartoon plays. And what's ironic is my friend, I just interviewed Lawrence Walden. He was friends and played with Cap Calloway. So that would tell he's got living history. So he played with Cap Calloway, and Cap Calloway, like I said, played some of the music. So they would play the music at the beginning of the cartoon, and then the cartoon would come on. Again, like if you pay attention, you see in the Betty Boops, when the original ones, or the cartoon was, the color was, you could tell it was supposed to be a black person, and then it faded. So I guess they couldn't make up their mind, or I'm not sure, is Helen Kane, because that's you see some places show Helen Kane as Betty Boop. So anyway, I didn't know about the lawsuit and all that kind of stuff. Okay, back to the video.
Predated her. Baby Esther's baby style did little to bring her mainstream fame, as she died in relatively obscurity, but a piece of her lives on in an iconic character, Betty Boop. The first licensed African-American female pilot was named Bessie Coleman. Born in Atlanta, Texas in 1892, Bessie Coleman grew up in a world of harsh poverty, discrimination, and segregation. She moved to Chicago at 23 to seek her fortune, but found little opportunity there as well. Vital tales of flying exploits from returning World War I soldiers first inspired her to explore aviation, but she faced a double stigma in that being both African-American and a woman. Coleman set her sights on France to reach her dreams and began studying French. In 1920, Coleman crossed the ocean with all of her savings and the financial support of Robert Abbott, one of the first African-American millionaires. Over the next several months, she learned to fly, and in June of 1921, the Federation of Aeronautique Internationale awarded her an international pilot's license. For African-American women to see the dream of being independent meant a lot to them. When feminism was a naive kid, Coleman was flying in the sky. Coleman's return to the United States was widely celebrated. Reporters turned out in droves to greet her. Coleman performed at numerous air shows over the next 5 years, performing thrilling stunts, encouraging other African Americans to pursue flying, and refusing to perform where blacks were not admitted. Only 2 years into her flight career, Coleman survived her first significant airplane accident. In February of 1923, her airplane engine suddenly stopped working, and she crashed. She was severely hurt in the accident and suffered a broken leg, a few cracked ribs, and a cut on her face. Thankfully, Coleman was able to heal from her injuries fully. This accident didn't stop her from flying. She went back to performing dangerous air tricks in 1925. On April the 30th, 1926, Bessie Coleman took a test flight with a mechanic named William Willis. Willis was piloting the plane as Coleman sat in the passenger seat. At about 3,000 feet in the air, a loose wrench got stuck in the aircraft's engine. Willis was no longer able to control the steering wheel, and the plane flipped over. Unfortunately, Coleman was not wearing a seatbelt. Airplanes at the time did not have a roof or any protection. Coleman immediately fell out of the open plane and died. On her tragic death, the famous writer and equal rights advocate Ida B. Wells presided over her funeral. An editorial in the Dallas Express stated, "There's reason to believe that the general public did not completely sense the size of her contributions to the achievements of the race as such." Interracial marriage in the United States.
Man, a rough way to go. But that show you how sometimes you have to leave the United States to get some success and then come back. There was a lot of those different stories like that. Well, we're not teaching you. We don't want you to teach you. We don't want you to learn. We don't want you to take jobs from other people. So she still continued to move forward. And we're talking about and I see your question, Ashley. Do you have information about these black slave owners too? I really only heard about one, but heard it was more. I'll have to, I'll have to look it up. It had to be. It was lots of people of color that had wealth, and we even I just popped in my mind. We can go. Yeah, I think I've taken you to Kingsley Plantation here in Jacksonville. Let me move that real quick. Kingsley Plantation. The Kingsley Plantation. It was a European. That was his plantation up there. Up there, north of Jacksonville. There's a plantation that we can go to and visit and see the house. And the owner was a white man, married a woman of color. He passed away, and she remained the owner of the plantation and the owner of the slaves. So yes, she owned slaves right here in Jacksonville area. But majority of the people of color owning slaves, that was really up north. But yeah, we can dig into it some more to see more people of color. Like I said, it wasn't a lot of times. It wasn't really wasn't even it wasn't a black and white thing. So you could probably have been well-renowned, rich black person, and you have white indigent servants. Which a lot of times you can see that where people. A lot of people of color with money, and they have white people working for them. So it shouldn't be that much of a stretch. So it's still the money was what was talking. If you had the money, you had the land, and you needed slaves, it was a law of the land. Okay. All right. We are talking about interracial marriages. I like the story of the Loves. I think the Loves family up in Virginia. Oh, whoops. Actually, last name was
Coleman immediately fell out of the open plane and died. On her tragic death, the famous writer and equal rights advocate Ida B. Wells presided over his funeral. An editorial in Dallas Express stated, "There's reason to believe that the general public did not completely sense the size of her contributions to the achievements of the race as such. Interracial marriage in the United States was banned in 1664 and not overturned until 1967. During the 17th and early 18th century, the growing number of interracial marriages, also known as miscegenation between blacks and whites, led to this new law's passage. The first anti-miscegenation law enacted was in the colony of Maryland in 1664. And additional colonies quickly followed suit. These marriages were prohibited, and penalties included the enslavement, exile, or imprisonment of the white perpetrators. These laws have been evolved over the years, and attempts have been made to modify the Constitution to ban interracial marriage in all states. It would take 300 years for this law to be overturned. In 1967, Richard Levy, a white man, and Mildred Jeter, a black woman, were married in the District of Columbia. When they returned home to Virginia, they were arrested and convicted of violating the state's anti-miscegenation law. They each faced a year in jail, and the case went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court found in favor of the Levings in a famous trial, Leving versus Virginia. They ruled that prohibiting interracial marriage at the state and local levels was unconstitutional. This meant that marriages between the races were legal in the country for the first time since 1664. In 2000, Alabama became the last state to officially legalize interracial marriage by removing the unenforceable ban that was still contained in their state constitution. There are many such cases of rebel lovers who never bow down in front of laws. Here we come to the end of this video.
So that's 2020 before Alabama finally changed their law. But if you heard, so around the same time when the black race and the white race was invented, that's when they banned interracial marriages. So like again, before that, before they invented the black race, the white race, they didn't care. They fell in love. If the families decided to get married or whatever, it didn't matter. But when they wanted to separate the races, when they wanted to, give white people privileges and take privileges away from black people, that's when they passed these laws. And I don't know if you heard, they said it real quick. If a white person, it was mostly, it was both ways. But if a white woman married a black man, the black man really got punished harshly. And then vice versa, if a white man decided to have a black woman, a lot of times they really didn't push him that hard. They shunned him and talked about him or whatever, but he didn't get hurt that bad, unless maybe if he was poor. But they said it was if they got caught marrying interracially, that white person could be thrown into slavery too. So this is during slavery time. So if white man got with a black woman, we knew that happened a whole lot. Even the slave masters was doing the do, but a lot of times they wasn't marrying them. But like I said, we talk about the story here of Kingsley Plantation. He actually married his slave. But so the law was, okay, you as a white person decide to marry a black person or a black slave, we throwing you into slavery. So now you can see, I know a lot of that wasn't in the history books, where white people thrown into slavery. They thrown on the plantation too, just like the black folks. They took all, okay, they got beat up and brutalized for wanting to marry, one of the persons of color. But anyway, a lot of crazy stuff. Oh my goodness, I don't want to. It's an hour, 12 minutes. But anyway, I had no. I got some other videos, but the reasoning of this, like I said, we in a society now where a lot of our history is it's been outlawed. I know a lot of stuff that I said today. I think the state of Florida don't want that be taught in the schools. They don't want the school system. They don't want the children to learn that. So the information is here. We live in a society where information is everywhere. So if they take the books out, and I've seen some schools where they done got rid of just about all the books because they're afraid of the government. The government is saying freedom of speech, saying that we have our freedoms, but at the same time, we only have the freedom that they want you to learn. So that's not really freedom. It's like certain things. We only want you to learn this. We don't want you to learn all the truth. We just want to teach this part. As long as you saying everything making us look good, that's fine. If you say anything that makes us look bad, we don't want to teach it. We need to erase that and hide out of history. That is bad. But we really don't have excuse. If they do take it out of school, parents, it's still on you. But one, learn it yourself and to teach it yourself. And just a reminder of somebody just talking about they mad that they took prayer out of school. Look, if you're praying with your kids at home, prayer is going to be in them. Yeah. If you're praying with your kids at home, if you're praying with your kids, they're going to take prayer with them. So you shouldn't be worried about that they took prayer out of school. They should have been praying before they went to school. And then when they got to school, they be still praying with each other. So whether the school say they can pray or not, they still should be praying. So it shouldn't be they took prayer out of school. So that really, yeah, I understand. I understand where you was able to stop and spend. I think remember when I was in school, it really wasn't. I think what they gave was a minute. Like it was 1 minute of silence, If you wanted to pray during that minute, if you just want to do nothing, you had them on 1 minute. And that's what they said they took away. We talked about a minute. Come on now. Yeah, I understand. But taking that minute away, when the child should have been taught to pray at home, should have been taught to pray on the way to school, should have been taught to pray all throughout the day. And so it shouldn't have been a big deal. Oh, we taking prayer away. We're not going to give you that minute. Oh, well, we still praying. We're going to pray 10 minutes. We can pray during our lunch hour. You know, if prayer was in the students, the prayer would still be in the school. Now they want to let that 1 minute, passing law to take that minute away to devastate the school system for years to come. It shouldn't have happened. So we still can come back from that. You can still teach your kids to pray, tell them to bring prayer with them in their heart. So don't let them, you know, somehow they took prayer away. They didn't take prayer away. You got to take prayer with you. You got to have prayer with you. All right. Okay. I think I done ran my mouth enough for this evening. So anybody, any questions or anything you want to talk about before we go? So that hit me up. I would like to play, if anybody would like to play it another day, some hoops. Some, you know, like Black History trivia. If I want to play the game. So I'm gonna try, maybe if we could try to do that sometime next week. All right. Thanks everybody for your time. Thank you for tuning in. Everybody, have a good night. God bless.